So it's 15th of May, and I want to talk about your right to decide that you want to die. This is something people say to us a lot. I have a right to decide that if I choose assisted suicide, then that's what I'm going to do. What does that right mean? When you dig a little bit beneath the, what I would call veneer of rights, let's look at Switzerland at the moment. There are 2 votes going through. One, to see if people, let's have a look, to introduce a complete ban on the practice of assisted suicide, which for quite a long time has been legal in Switzerland, and people will have heard of Dignitas and Mr. Minelli, the Darth Vader of euthanasia, welcoming people with broken hearts, broken heads, and broken lives. But it's unlikely that it will be banned in Switzerland. The second vote, right, is a limit on who can go to Switzerland, which is worried about being seen as the, I think they call it the suicide capital of Europe. So we've got a conundrum, a sort of philosophical question here. On the one hand, they're saying we support the right for people to commit suicide with or without help. And on the other hand, they're saying we don't want you to come here to do it because we don't want to be seen as great mountains to climb, beautiful lakes and fantastic suicide hotels. It's not really going to be a poster that's going to sell a lot, is it? I don't know what the picture would be. Doesn't bear thinking about, but I'm sure Mr. Minelli could come up with a lovely picture, perhaps of one of his victims dying. So what I want to look at is the grey area of a right. So the Swiss don't want people going over there because it's all right for their people who hold their rights to do this very highly apparently, but they don't want us to hold our right to do it in their country. They say we're exporting our moral dilemmas. Well, thank you whoever for giving us moral dilemmas. So let's look at the issue of rights. It seems to me this is a philosophical question. Well, it is, obviously. I'm not a philosopher, and if you are and you want to argue from your libertarian point of view, which is what this guy, Professor Nigel Bigger of Oxford University, he's lecturing ethics and public life, he has a lot to say about euthanasia. And sometimes it's good to go to people like philosophers. It's their job to present society with views and arguments and to get us to think about things, which is why philosophy isn't a waste of time. He talks about people saying, I've got a right, okay? And what he says is this, and I'll explain it. The problem is that what fends off interference into our rights also generates indifference and carelessness. If my life only has the worth that I accord to it, then it has no objective value. And if it has no objective value, then why should anybody else care for it? Okay, if you're anything like me, you need to think about that for a minute, and I apologise to people who immediately get the point, probably philosophy students, like my son. It's the feeling that when people say, don't interfere, that will fend off, it's my right, that will fend off any chance of people interfering. But what he's saying is, when we leave it alone, then people become indifferent to the subject matter. It's a sort of switch off button, ding, that's my right. Oh, okay. So they become indifferent, well, lead them to it, and they become careless. This indifference to your life having worth to society means that the carelessness brings about kids being left in cots in Eastern Europe because they're disabled, old people dying in homes in England and in hospitals because they're old. Ultimately, if you think about it in this way, when people said, look, I've got a right to be a member of the Nazi Party and you won't be able to stop me, and we all fought for our rights, it became quite careless there. And we can't say they became careless because they were people in society. And if you don't believe that your life has an objective value, that is, a value to others, then, as he says, why should anybody care then? So we have a society where we say we don't care about each other and we don't make decisions about each other, and we're not careful with those decisions. You see, the thing is, Dignity in Dying will say, they will keep saying, we will be careful, we will be careful, the legislation will be careful. But it won't be, because if you talk, I have a right, then you get that indifference. It's up to you. Well, the fact is it isn't, because anything that's lawful is made for society. An example, we in society decide to have hospitals and we legislate for good practice. In society we legislate for our food to be safe, for babies to be born in a safe environment. We make decisions for what's good for society. So if you, and that is because other people in society should have a worth to us. The issue of whether because you're disabled you have no worth will keep raising its head, because once you say, oh well, we'll draw a line here and they don't have worth but you do. Take for example a law like a driving law. And if you say, well, I don't have any objective worth to others in society, so therefore, and I have heard people say it, if I want to drive a car at 90 miles an hour through a village, then that's my right. But because we value other people's lives, we legislate to stop that happening. But you see, even then, as many people know to their cost, it still happens. Because even when we've got rules and legislature, we are careless. And we become a right to kill yourself. People also say things like, oh, I'm sitting on the fence over this. Okay, remember this. You have to be fit to sit on a fence. You have to look good sat on that fence. And you have to be at a point in your life where that's what you want to do and it's safe to do so. If you've got a bony ass, or you're in pain, or you're too lonely to go out and sit on a fence, or too ill, or too old to sit on a fence, you might not think it's such a good place to be. Take for example this idea that it might be alright to drive through villages at 90 miles an hour. And of course we don't, because we care about other people. We give their lives an objective value, but we still do it. And it is surprising, we are careless, and we are actually quite indifferent. I mean, Sweden, I was surprised to discover, has a zero tolerance approach to car accidents. I mean, it would make a good Monty Python sketch, but I was really, it means that the way they design their road safety is different to ours. And I bet they feel safer driving. I don't feel safe driving assisted suicide legislation, because I know that history tells us that when we used our rights in the past to not care about other people, we let them die in cots because they're disabled, we invade villages using children and murder people, we cut people's organs out, we do all sorts of things. We are careless and we are indifferent, and we do drive at 90 miles an hour through villages, and saying that we have a right to use assisted suicide is basically saying I've got a right to drive through a village at 90 miles an hour, and I don't actually care who else's life this alters. And it's a completely unselfish act to say I won't support it because I don't want to hurt anybody else. How good for us is that? Okay, so don't drive through villages at 90 miles an hour.